Now, as we look ahead to the week beginning February the 19th, here's just a quick recap of why we're looking at these economic data points, what kind of opportunities we see each week, and here's an example from last week looking at the Swiss inflation data. Have a look, and this is why we focus on these events. On February the 13th, one key event we were looking at was the Swiss CPI print. The Swiss National Bank had already mentioned that they were concerned about the strength of the Swiss franc. So any significant falls in Swiss inflation was likely to see significant Swiss franc selling. So if we saw a big miss as we analysed the data ahead of the event, then we're expecting Euro Swiss franc and Dollar Swiss franc upside. Now, looking at the data point, you can see 1.3% was what we're looking for the year on year, minus 0.2% or lower for the month on month. Now, taking a look here, you can see that the data did come in below expectations, 1.3% tick. That was a sell Swiss franc bias. And the month on month data, it wasn't quite what we're looking for, but given the fact that it was towards the low end of expectations at 0.2%, that did give us a Euro Swiss franc upside. We could have also taken a pound Swiss franc upside with that strong UK wage data out half an hour before. And you can see here was the trade, Euro Swiss franc. You can see it moved very nicely in one direction immediately after the event. And a number of people took advantage of that Euro Swiss franc miss in the Swiss inflation data that took place on February the 13th. So these are the kinds of high probability trading opportunities we're looking for on a daily basis. So now you see why we focus on these events. What can we look for this week? Well, there's a couple of opportunities that are standing out. The first one is the Canadian inflation data. Now, at the last Bank of Canada interest rate meeting, the Bank of Canada, they revised growth lower and they revised inflation lower. And in the press conference, Governor Macklem, he expressed concerns over the persistence of inflation, that it was broad-based and it was premature to discuss a rate cut. So this inflation data is going to be crucial. If we see a below consensus print, that's going to justify the Bank of Canada's revisions of growth and inflation lower. But they didn't revise 2025's inflation forecast lower, only 2024's. That was revised lower from 3% to 2.8%. So in other words, if we see a big miss in the data here, below what the markets are expecting, and we have a special calendar where we can see the minimum and maximum expectations, and if that comes in below those expectations, CAD selling will be expected, and we'd look to pair CAD with a stronger currency on Tuesday, depending on market conditions. Now, if you look at the print and it comes in much higher, then that will question whether the Bank of Canada was right to revise inflation expectations lower for 2024. They are expecting it to drop down to 2.8%. So if it's still high and inflation data is coming in above market's maximum expectations, that means the Bank of Canada may have to keep rates higher for longer, which should lift the Canadian dollar. So CAD CPI on Tuesday is one event not to miss. We will be covering it live in real time so you can see how those opportunities work out. When we get through to Wednesday, there's wage price data for Australia. That will be important. The RBA is trying to work out how aggressive they need to be in terms of their rate path, and they're not signaling or signing rate cuts yet. But if we start to see wages drop lower, that will give them reassurance that services inflation is starting to drop, and wages are a key driver for inflation. Higher wages lead to higher prices, which can lead to even higher wages, which can lead to even higher prices. So tackling inflation, you need to see the wage bill come down and wages drop in order to see deflationary forces quell that rising inflation. So a big miss or beat in the wage price data could lift the Australian dollar. FOMC meeting minutes on Wednesday, they're pretty dry and dull now. We've had quite a lot of action since the FOMC meeting with the really strong jobs. We had a hot CPI, hot PPI, and those meetings minutes will be pretty stale by now. However, on Thursday, the French, German, Eurozone PMIs. Now, there's a special technique for looking at these PMIs. You don't want to wait around to the Eurozone data. The markets start moving off the French data. But if we saw a surprise beat to the upside, that could give the euro a little bit of lift. Okay, the market's expecting a slower eurozone growth. We've seen quite a lot of negative sentiment around the eurozone. If that's not surprising to the upside, we could see a nice move higher in the euro, particularly something like the euro pound, with the Bank of England expected to start signalling interest rate cuts sort of fairly quickly, and certainly much more quickly than the ECB. So that euro pound buy bias could enjoy a little bit of a boost if we saw surprise beat to the upside for the eurozone data. UK, now these services PMIs, that 54.3 prior reading was very strong, and that was part of the reason for the confidence that the GDP drop we saw last week, the sort of positive green shoots of growth, and it was largely these PMI services from the previous month, which is being seen as a supportive force for the pound. So if this comes in and the manufacturing data surprises to the downside, we might suddenly see pound sellers step in, because those green shoots of growth, if there's a worry that they're actually fading much more quickly before they even started, then that will worry markets. So a big miss in the services PMI print, then look for pound selling on Thursday. US got manufacturing services PMI, again, an out of consensus print, could provide a very short-term opportunity in the dollar. And then Friday, we got some assorted data points, but German business climate, not really much going on to close the week out. So the main real events of the week is the CAD CPI data and the Eurozone PMIs. We will be covering them all, getting ready for each one with a cheat sheet, like how you saw for that Swiss inflation data that we've covered this week. It's some events not to miss, and we'll be covering them and getting ready for them before the event.